To everybody on the East Coast, good afternoon, and everybody else, good morning. Excuse me. Thanks for giving up an hour of your day to come hang out with us and listen to us talk about our current parking structure cost outlook. For nearly 20 years, we've published a cost projection for what it takes to build structured parking. And we get a lot of positive feedback, along with the occasional hate mail telling us that either our projections are way too high or way too low. A few years ago, Ray and I decided that it would probably make some sense to kind of go through the specifics, the sausage making, if you will, of what goes into our cost projections and the cost outlook in general. But before we get into that, let's do a couple introductions here. Let's see. There we go. I'm Rob McConnell, one of the principals in the parking design group, parking design and consulting group. And I've been a parking consultant for, more than 30 years now. And for whatever reason, that picture of me looks really weird. It looks like somebody stretched my head. So I don't know what's going on there. Ray, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Raymond Smith. Like Rob, I'm a principal in the parking group. Been doing parking consults and structural engineering for, the past 27 years, and I'm out of the Indy office.
I should have said that I'm based in Charlotte, but both Ray and I travel all over the place and do work in all 50 states, depending on what's going on. For those of you that are unfamiliar with WGI, WGI is a multidiscipline transportation-focused engineering firm. We've got bunch of offices, primarily in the Southeast and Texas, but we have other offices around the country, and we're a pretty aggressively growing company. So we may have an office near you if we don't already in the near future. Here's a a brief outline of our presentation today. We're going to look at how we calculate the cost outlook that we publish, and also how to apply those numbers so that you get specifics to what you might be looking at. We're going to take a little deeper dive into what makes up the construction costs for a garage. We're going to talk a little bit about soft costs, and then we're going to touch right at the end on operating and maintenance costs. Now, that's probably a little bit more subjective than some of these, but we'll cover that as best we can. If you attended our presentation a few years ago, we did one somewhat similar to this presentation, or pretty similar to this presentation. And if you attended that one, some of this information is probably familiar to you. Obviously, we've updated the numbers since that was a few years ago. And there will be a lot of numbers here. So hopefully you've had your coffee and can stay focused as we go through some of this multiplication and factoring and so on and so forth. So off we go. The two images here, the one on the left is the very first article that we published. It was in well, I should probably take a step back and say that the parking group within WGI used to be Carl Walker Incorporated. Some of you may be familiar with Carl Walker, parking consulting firm. We merged with WGI in 2017, so we've been WGI for 8 years. But Back in 2003, December of 2003, we published an article called "How Much Will My Parking Structure Cost?" And every year since then, we have updated the numbers and published an updated version and our prognostications of what will happen in the market moving forward. And the image on the right there is the latest version that we published in June of this year. And if you don't have a copy of it yet, um, log on to our website and uh, we'd be happy to send you one. Um, just for fun, the the cost of a new parking structure, the national median cost of a new parking structure in December of 2003 was just over $11,000 a space. And by contrast, in June, or I guess our numbers are April, into April, April this year, the cost of the national median cost for a new parking structure was not quite $30,000 a space. So it's almost three times um, the cost, 264% increase over 21 years. And if you want to know what that is on an annualized basis, that means the costs have increased 4.7% annually.
Kind of looking at the trends over the last 20 some years, you can kind of tell that we've kind of done that 4% increase that Rob was speaking of. Obviously, post COVID there, we went through a significant increase due to inflation and other factors, material and being able to supply chain issues. So we had a large increase there in 20 to 21 and 21 to 22. Those were large increases, and it started to come back to normal. From 22 to 23, it went up 3.9%. And then from 23 to 24, it went up 3.1%. And just over the last 3 months since we published the article in early May, it's went up 0.85%. So that's kind of trending to a 3.5% increase. And we'll see if that, continues through the rest of 2024 here. So let's start into how we calculate this. And, it really starts with all of the projects that we've done since 1986. So when we try to calculate the national median cost, a lot of factors come into play, and we track all these factors like the total number of parking spaces, the square footage of the garage, what type of structure was it, cast in place or precast, what was the total cost, the bid cost at the time it was bid. Some other important factors you'll see that are very important for us to bring the cost back to today's dollars is the ENR building cost index and that's published every month. So that's helps us bring it back to current dollars. And then the city cost factor index that allows us to compare one city in the United States to the other. So those are all some factors that we track and are important as we create the national average. Here's just a snapshot of 14 projects out of our hundreds of projects that we've collected over the years since 1986. And, they range from very small garages, 200 spaces or so, to large multi-thousand car spaces. And some of the arrows there are just some of the key factors that I just spoke about that we track. So looking at a particular garage, for example, how do we bring that particular parking garage to today's dollars? What would it cost today? And then we normalize that to a national average. And then we combine all those garages and we come up with a national mean. So if we just drill down a little bit, look at Montgomery College, that's in Rockville, Maryland. So when you look at that garage, it was 918 spaces, 308,000 square feet. That garage at bid time back in 2014 was $23,250,000. $270,000 project. That was the construction cost. And it's important to know what the ENR building cost index was in 2014 in April when it was bid, and that was 5357. So we take that number, 5357, that was back in April 2014, and we compare it to what the ENR building cost index is, today. And in May of 2024, it was 8307. And so we use that information to calculate, the factor of 1.551, and that's the increase factor when you bring it back to today's dollars. So you multiply the 23 million 275 times that escalation factor of 1.551, and that would tell you that garage at Montgomery College in Rockville, Maryland today would cost you $36 million dollars and 39,000 a space, or $117 a square foot. So that's how you would bring it back to today's dollars, or bring it forward to today's dollars. The next thing we want to do is we need to normalize that cost. And we do that by looking at the city cost index of Rockville, Maryland. We don't actually have the index for Rockville, so we'll look at the closest city nearby, and that would be Baltimore, Maryland. And so you look at the city index for Baltimore, Maryland, and that's 92.8. You compare that to 100, and you'll come up with a location factor of 1.078. And then you'll multiply that location factor by the cost of the garage in today's dollars, which was at 39 million. And then you'll get the normalized cost of that garage, which would be $42.37 million. I mean, it'd be 42,000 a space, sorry.
Yeah, and 33, yeah, I guess it was 33. The original was $33 million, or the escalated cost was $33 million bucks. Yeah.
Yeah, at
Sorry,
39,000 a space. And then when you
36.
normalize it, yeah, 36 million was what today's cost would be. And then when you make the adjustment to a national average cost, then that's where you would multiply your cost per space or your cost per square foot times that location factor. And that's where you would go from 39,000 a space to 42,000 a space, or 126, going from 117 to $126 a square foot.
Right. That would equate everything to a national median cost, right?
Right. Yes. And then that's where then we take all of our hundreds of garages that we've done since 1986, and we do that same process for all of them. And then we add them all up, and we find, the one in the middle, which is the national median. And that's where we arrive at the $29,900 a space, or $89 a square foot.
So how do we use this number? Well, let's say, and I've picked Columbia, South Carolina as just a random city. But let's say you were wanting to build a parking structure in Columbia, South Carolina, for whatever reason, and you wanted to know how much you should budget for that on the construction cost side. And the first thing you might do is in our cost article, we have a list of, I don't know what it's about 30 something cities where we do a fair amount of business, and we got specific numbers for those cities. But these are generally larger cities, and Columbia is a little smaller, so it's not on the list. But Charlotte's kind of close by. Charlotte's 90 miles away, hour and a half drive. So you could look at the number for Charlotte and say, okay, well, Charlotte's, it's going to cost me, about $26,500 a space, or just under $80 a square foot to build a garage. But Charlotte's a little bigger, a little bit more dense. A little higher cost of living, might be close, but let's see if we can dial it in a little better. So um, the you might or the next approach would be to look up what the city index factor is. In this case, we're taking the number out of the RS means Gordian city cost factor chart that Ray shared with you a few minutes ago, and it has Columbia in there and has a value of 85.3 percent of the national average building cost. If you don't have access to the means tables, you could honestly just take the cost of you look up the cost of living index online for whatever city you're looking for, and it's going to get you pretty close. Um, but in this case, we're going to use the means number, which is 85.3. So we're going to take the national median cost that we publish of $29,900 a space, take 83% of that, and that implies that it for a fairly straightforward garage, it's going to cost you about $25,500 per space, or $89.45, or excuse me, or $76.30 per square foot, which is obviously a little less than the national average or national median cost because it's a little lower cost of living. Then you want to inflate, well, depending on when you want to build the garage, you want to escalate and inflate that cost, to a point where you think you might, get into construction, or where a contractor will then, give you a hard number for that. And, historically, since 2007, or from 2007 to 2020, the cost rose about 3.7% a year. Then we had the two crazy years after COVID, where it went up, I don't know, something like 20, a net of like 25%, close to 25%. And then we're back to in the 3.5% annualized cost increase over the last couple of years. So just for conservatism, let's use 4% inflation and say you want to know what it would cost to build a garage in September of 2025, which is about a year away. And so we're going to inflate that $25,500 per space, $76.30 per square foot, by about 4%. And you'd come up with $26,500 a space, or $79.35 a square foot as a probable construction cost for a relatively basic parking structure in September of next year. That would give you a decent idea of what it would cost you.
Well, next we want to look at some of the caveats to this, because, it's our national average. So it's looking at all of our garages that we've ever done over the last 20 some years. So you have to take that part into account when you look at those average numbers. And so you start to look at, what are some of those things that would make this garage either higher or lower than what the national average would be of our average parking garage. And some of those factors are, is it a cast in place garage versus precast? That could slightly increase the cost, depending on where you're at, because some places that actually wouldn't be an increase. So it just depends on where you're at. But traditionally, it can be a little bit more. Do you have EV parking stations? Do you have to have a stormwater management plan? Are you putting solar panels on the roof? Do you have a ped bridge? Do you have a snow management system? All those things can start to, drive the cost up of, because this is an average garage. Is it a very small garage, which you'd have to kind of increase your cost because of the lack of efficiency and economy of scale. Uh, Subsequent to that, if it's a large parking garage, 1,000, 2,000 cars, you're going to lower that cost from the average because of just the opposite reasons. You have a large economy of scale and lots of redundancy. So you got to kind of make some adjustments um, to what that average is, depending on what you're wanting to build. And just get a feel for the facade because that can become a big factor. If you have a very architecturally highly detailed looking garage, that can increase the cost. But these are just some pictures there of a normal cast in place or precast garage that would be part of the national median.
Yeah, these garages are ones that track right at, you know, escalated to today's dollars. They track right at the national median cost. So you know, it's not an ugly garage or a, well, I guess that's a subjective thing. But it's not an overly plain garage, but it's not a terribly ornate garage either. And I think all of these are precast, I think.
Yeah, the ones I could, from what I could tell, they are. Hey, Rob, one question that came up that I should have pointed out as one of the big cost drivers, and it is one of the things that we take out of the database, which is underground garages.
Yeah.
Because depending on the number of levels that you go into the ground, that has a huge impact on cost. So we do remove the underground garages because just a good rule of thumb, if you're going one level below grade, it's a 50% premium. If you're going two levels below grade, it can be 100% premium. Then it kind of starts to level off around 200% premium if you're three or four levels in the ground. So we do remove those. So just want to kind of answer one of the questions we got and make that clarification.
Yeah, we just got a question that about the efficiency of our typical you know, cost per square foot, cost per space averages out to about 334 square feet per space, and that's right on the money. Um, and yeah, that's again, as Ray was pointing out, it's a five. You know, the national median garage is a garage. It's somewhere in that 500 to 800 spaces, and typically for garages that size, we're looking at that 300.
Is usually when if you have occupied space on the first floor, if you have an express ramp where you're not parking on it, all those things can significantly increase the overall cost of the garage from what would be a normal cost because you're not as efficient. You're building structure that you can't park on or park in the space because you have an express ramp. If you've got retail at grade or other occupied spaces, those will all have a significant impact on the cost.
Yeah. We got another question that says, does the estimated cost per space include the at grade level or only the elevated structure parking spaces? So that's a good question. It does include all levels, including the grade level. And I know you might be thinking, well, the slab on grade is a lot cheaper to build than supported structure, and that's true. But you also have to factor in the foundations, which we, end up being kind of lumped in with the slab on grade. Now, I will say that if you are building a grade level plus one supported level structure, then the costs are going to be less expensive because your foundation costs will be relatively small, and you might be able to get away with cantilevered columns or something, in terms of the lateral load resisting elements and whatnot. So if you have a grade plus one structure, the numbers will be a little less expensive. But in general, if you're building a multi-level parking structure, you would figure that same cost per space for all levels, including the slab on grade, and likewise the same cost per square foot for all levels, including the slab on grade. Um, We got another question here that says, "What foundation system is assumed?" Well, the whole it runs the gamut, right, Ray? I mean, it's
Right.
everything.
But
Um,
it does still do the average, and so probably there's the
oh,
average is probably more garages that are probably spread footings than they are, deep, unique foundations. So I do think that when we have a deep foundation system, we do add a premium to the cost of the garage. So lots of factors that come in to add value to the garage that we have to take into account, and that would be one of them if it has deep foundations.
I see another question, but for whatever reason, I can't get to it. Maybe it got, oh, there it is. Let's see. Here's another question. How much of that average is the structural components precast or cast in place? 50 to 60%, trying to evaluate some numbers from concrete companies. That's a great segue because I'm just getting ready to get into what makes up uh, a construction cost. So thanks, Rick. Um, the here's a sort of an outline of the different aspects of parking structure construction, and we typically categorize everything according to the Construction Specifications Institute (CSI) 50 division layout. There is a Division 0 and a Division 1 and Division 2. Division 2 is demolition, and typically that's other than minor demolition, of whatever surface lot paving or minor stuff on the site, on the existing site, is included in the cost. But any sort of major demolition, if you had to take a building down or something beforehand, that would be in addition to what our costs include. Division 0 and Division 1 are administrative. And so the rest of them are actually the different components of construction: concrete, masonry, metals, et cetera, all the way down to the heavy civil work, Division 31, 32, and 33. And the typical project, your contractor will submit their pay requests using well, a lot of times they'll use the AIA, American Institute of Architects, Form G702 and G703, which tracks exactly with the CSI format, and it'll tell you um, exactly what your costs are for each division, and what makes up each division. And we have hundreds and thousands of these that we go through to kind of vet our costs as we make our projections. Now, to answer the last question that came up, what does the concrete, what portion of the construction cost does the concrete itself, the superstructure, and maybe it's more than the superstructure, it's the foundations and the superstructure make up, and it's yeah, you're right on the money there. It's right in that 40 to 50% of the construction cost. And again, it's going to depend a little bit on the complexity of the architectural facade. Um, but typically it's in that 40 to 50%. So if you got a number from a precaster, for example, and it came in at well, I don't know, I just got one the other day that was, I think, $42 a square foot. If I were to take that number and double it, I'd come up with about $84 a square foot. If I assumed it was 40% of the cost, I'd be somewhere in the 90 to $95 a square foot, which is right in the right overall cost range. Some of the other structural components include masonry. There's usually not a whole lot of masonry in parking structures, so that might make up 1%. But if you do a lot of brick, Again, on your facade, you could add as much as 10 to 15% to the cost. So, CMU and basic masonry is very, very inexpensive. Brick masonry can get very expensive if it's elaborate. Metals, miscellaneous metals like lintels and shelf angles and all the stuff, guardrails for stairs and whatnot. That's usually in the 2 to 3% range. Um, Waterproofing, a critical component of parking structures. Can't skimp on waterproofing. Typically, it's in the 1 to 3% range, and again, that's going to depend on where you are in the world and uh, how intensively you need to protect the structure. If you're on the coast in Florida or up in northern Michigan or Minnesota, your durability requirements are much more intensive than if you were in, say, southern Alabama or something like that. And durability components are the waterproofing systems and the roofing and the flashing and all that type of stuff. Architectural components, typically we see them in the 5 to 10% range, but again, they can get, if you start talking about stainless steel facades or something like that, those things run, $150 a vertical square foot. So, it can add up very quickly. Also, if you have to have some sort of high security lockdown type frontage or even the upper levels, then that adds cost as well. Finishes, usually not a whole lot in the way of finishes, other than maybe some painting. I guess striping qualifies as a finish, but striping is relatively inexpensive. Somewhere in the fraction of a percent to 5% range. There's some parking specialty that you have to consider. Parking enforcement and/or access control equipment. Sometimes, depending on how a garage is operated, sometimes that if you hire an operator to operate your garage, sometimes they bring the equipment with them. So it's just built into their operating contract. But if you were to install it yourself, it's gonna, yeah, and depending on the complexity of it, if you want full, single space occupancy parking guidance, you would, you could add a couple percent to the cost. Basic system would be, maybe $50,000, $100,000. And signage is another piece. Again, I'm always an advocate for simple signage. You don't want to oversign things because people start, getting paralysis if they've got too much information they have to process. But typically, it makes up about usually less than 1% of the total construction cost. And then the elevators are pretty expensive these days. Typical elevators running something like $40,000 to $50,000 a stop. For a machine roomless kind of standard elevator that we're using. So that can add up depending on how many elevators you factor in. Our median garage, I believe, has 2 elevators in it, right, Ray? I mean, that's kind of the
Yeah, because it's
median.
based on about 500 spaces is the average garage. And, a good rule of thumb is you figure about 350 spaces per elevator, and the average garage being 500, you would want 2 elevators, and also for a little bit of redundancy and downtime.
Mechanical systems, that's your drainage, that's your standpipes. If you have a garage that has a footprint over 48,000 square feet, or has a height to the top floor, from the top floor to the lowest level of fire department access over 55 feet, building code in a lot of places, the 2021 IBC building code and those places that have adopted that now requires fire sprinkling, which is I have 3 to 5% typical for your plumbing and mechanical and fire protection components. But if you have to add sprinklers, it definitely can add another 1 to 3% over and above that. I'm dealing with that on a garage in Mississippi right now, where it's adding almost $3 million to a $50 million budget. So not cheap. And we can have a conversation offline about whether or not they about the necessity of having sprinklers in parking garages, but I'm not going to get off topic to talk about that. Electrical telecom components, that's your lighting. Really, the only major electrical system in a garage is lighting. There's a little bit of demand for the elevators, but EV charging is becoming a significant cost component in the cities that are requiring it. I know, we're doing projects. I believe there's 60, something like 60 cities, a lot of cities in California, actually pretty much the whole state of California, and then places like Denver and Washington, D.C., that have some pretty significant requirements to incorporate electric vehicle charging systems for EV installed, EV ready, EV capable, and each one of those EV charging stations is typically a 50 amp circuit for a level 2, and a lot of conduit and a lot of copper in those things. So that can add 2 to 3% to the cost of a garage as well, over and above the 6 to 12% that I'm mentioning there. And then there's the earthwork. As Ray mentioned, we're not, we've excluded the below grade parking, and so this is kind of, I don't want to say minimal earthwork, but there'll be a little bit of excavation, hauling, little structural fill, a little bit of utility work, but this is all kind of within the site. This would preclude, our numbers would preclude massive utility projects, or bringing in roads for a half a mile or something crazy like that. So civil components within reason is part of that. Let's see, we got another question here. Have you had any experience forecasting the cost for additional structural components to prepare for the addition of rooftop solar? Yeah, that's a great question. We do a fair amount of that. Ray, you want to field that one, or?
Yeah, because that's not very expensive to added cost for solar panels on the roof. We've been asked to do that a lot, and we've incorporated that additional cost, because for the most part, that level is pretty light. The solar panels are light. The structural framing to support that is pretty light. So we can estimate that for you, but that's a fairly inexpensive item to add.
Yeah, and I guess it all depends on how robust, or what the structure is that supports the solar. If you put a full roof or something over the top, you could be 30-40 bucks a square foot for that. But
Right. And if you're trying to get something that's pretty watertight,
Mhm.
and using it as a reducing the weather element, like Rob said, a fully weatherproofed roof, it could probably range in that 50 to 60 range. Just so it all depends on what level of structure you're putting that solar panels on.
Okay, I saw another question there, but I can't get to it for whatever reason. Are these facts sheets available for print? The presentation? Yeah, I believe so. Uh, Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically we send out a link, um, after a day or two to the attendees to where they can download a copy of the presentation?
We don't usually include the presentation, but we can absolutely if we want to, and it'll be available by the end of the week.
Okay, sounds good. Um, and then the last piece that makes up, what the elements that make up a garage construction cost would be sort of the administrative efforts of the contractor and some of the what we call general conditions. That would be like things like the crane, the cost of the crane, the cost of the trailer, the cost of the fencing around the building, and then associated project staff and so on and so forth. And then of course, contractors got to make some money. So you figure 5 to 10% profit on top of everything else is going to make up the total cost.
That's the construction cost of a garage. But if you're obviously, the owner, and you've also got to consider what would all roll into the project cost. And so to that, you have to add soft cost. And some of the items that make up soft costs are the design fees for the designers. And if you got to do, testing and special inspections, there's also insurance and fees, management. There's also, some owners need to add a project management fee because they have staff overseeing the project. And then there's owner contingency. That can range from 3 to 10%, depending on, where the garage is located, the complexity of the garage. And some of those contingencies can be, owner added directed changes, things that they find out during the construction process that they want to add to the garage. So they have a contingency to cover those things. But for the most part, it's for unforeseen conditions like environmental issues, soil contamination, unsuitable soil. And one that people sometimes forget about, and it's pretty important to us here in the upper Midwest, is the weather conditions. The owner's responsible. They had to have costs to cover that because there can be days where the construction site is shut down and construction can't continue. And if that gets excessive, then that becomes part of the owner's contingency for those weather days. If you got a blizzard or something, you shut down for a longer period of time than normal, then you got to account for that. So we'll drive down a little bit deeper into the soft cost. Those for just the design fees, and the design team, consists of the prime consultant, which is the one who's organizing and running the team, the prime PM, the main point of contact to the owner. You have the architects that are designing all the exterior look of the garage, the stair towers, some of the doors, windows, glazing, all those architectural exterior features. They're handling those. Your structural engineer is doing all what I call the bones of the parking garage, the foundation, slab on grade, superstructure, roofs. It's what the structural engineer does. And then you have the parking consulting, and that's one of our specialties along with structural engineering. But the parking designer, he's handling all of the circulation, both vertically and horizontally, the ramping system. It's also defining the wayfinding and signage to help you find your way to find your parking space. And then once you become a pedestrian, to that wayfinding signage that helps you get to the stair towers and ultimately to your destination. Drainage and durability. Rob talked about this briefly earlier, and that's very important because, cars bring in rain and snow, and so our garages have to drain, and so that drainage design, the undulation of the floor to get water to flow to the drains, that's important, as well as all the waterproofing systems that Rob talked about. And then you have your MEP engineers that's doing all the lighting, the plumbing. If you have HVAC, especially if you have occupied space, they're also doing heating and cooling. So that's what the MEP engineer does. Your civil engineer is taking care of everything outside the footprint of the parking structure, and that includes getting utilities from the garage to the utilities, adjacent utilities, and designing all of the the grading and drainage and stormwater management around the parking garage and curb sidewalks, and you have landscapes engine designers that'll do all the hardscape and planting around the garage. So give you, we said earlier that can be 4 to 8%. Soft cost can be the design fees. It all depends. A lot of things factor in how big the garage is. If it's small, then those you get toward the higher end. If it's a large garage, large economy of scale, both for the contractor building it and then us designers designing it, you can get toward the lower end of that 4 to 8%. But if you're on a typical garage, it pretty closely breaks down to these percentages for the prime and the architect, structural engineers, parking designer. Those are, everything can change a little bit depending on if you have a lot of civil work and a lot of, the garage is way off the roadway. You got a lot of road work to do to get you back to the garage. Obviously, those can impact the civil work and stuff, but that's a pretty normal breakdown of a parking garage cost for the design fees.
All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about operating and maintenance expense, but before I do that, we had a question pop up. It said, what's a good minimum footprint for these median-sized garages? And that's a that's an interesting question. Our approach is that everything is a custom fit. So, we have to understand the amount of space that you have, and every one of these garages has got a different footprint. But your question, or your second question about having too small of a footprint impacting the efficiency is absolutely true. Probably the smallest efficient footprint, and I mean air quotes efficient footprint that you could have would be something that would be in the 122 feet wide by maybe 180 to 200 feet long. That's probably about as small as you're going to be able to get before you really start decreasing your efficiency. There's some tricks that you can do to help that out, but and then the other thing I guess I'll say is if there's I don't know, I hate to use the word ideal size, but if there's a good size for if you were designing a parking garage in a vacuum and didn't know anything about anything, a garage that is about 183, 184 feet wide by about 300 feet long. Those tend to be pretty efficient. And then, of course, as you get into these massive garages that have, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 spaces, your efficiency gets driven down just because of the economy of scale. So for really large garages, even with 9 by 18 spaces, I've done 310 square feet per space, and maybe even 307, 308 square feet per space. Yeah, but hopefully that answers your question. All right. Another question popped up. What advice do you give your clients when they're contemplating either horizontal or vertical expansion in the future? That's a great question. Ray, you want to field that one?
Yeah, because I mean, one of the key factors is if you're going to do vertical expansion, because say you're limited on space and you can't do a horizontal expansion. One of the drawbacks to a vertical expansion would be the fact that when you come back later and have to build a garage, especially if it's a cast in place PT garage, the formwork and the shoring that you have to put in, you're going to shut down multiple levels to add on to that garage in the future. So obviously, we always try to look to do a horizontal expansion first if we can, because it's going to be cheaper for you and more cost effective, more easily to do. If you don't have the space and the only way you can go up is vertical, that can be done. But you got to realize you are going to take some of the garage out of service, and then of course you've got to build more things into the parking structure to account for that vertical expansion. You got to increase the size of the foundations, increase the size of the lateral system, because you're going to get more seismic load on it in the future when that happens, and special detailing and stuff that we're used to doing at the column, so you can easily go in there and coupler on the rebar and build a garage up in the future. So it can all be done, but those are some of the things you have to be concerned about when you are contemplating doing a vertical or horizontal expansion. And Rob, is there anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, I'll amplify the point you made about if at all possible, horizontal expansion is the way to go. Build as high as you can initially, and then add horizontally if you can. That's always going to be the less expensive option. And one of the things that drives that, in addition to what Ray had mentioned, upsizing the garage and just the logistics of trying to expand and all that sort of thing, is invariably building codes change. And, seismic loads go up, wind loads just went up a few years ago, or the whole design process changed. Life safety code changes to where now your stair guardrails might not be in compliance, your accessibility requirements change and everything. And anytime you do a vertical expansion, you have to bring the whole rest of the facility up to code, just because you're adding on to an existing structure. Whereas with a horizontal expansion, you can consider those two buildings typically as separate structures. And that gives you some leeway to leave the original structure the way it is and just do all the upgrades on the current on the new structure. Another question popped up. Parking structure under building, above or below grade, cost implications. Yeah, it's a good question. We've been talking about efficiencies, and just the median efficiency is about 335 square feet per car for our cost outlook. This implies long span construction, clear span 60 feet across, and no columns coming down into the parking spaces themselves. As soon as you start talking about something up on top of the garage, a building, office building, residential building, whatever it is, you add a whole bunch of complexity for the code, but you also introduce inefficiency as you start dropping these columns in. And so your efficiency is going to go from 330 something square feet per car to 400 square feet per car or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to build that much more structure to get to the required number of spaces. So that's how that applies. And then we got one more question here. Any thoughts on repurposing existing garages to different uses, apartments or offices, versus building new ones that repurpose ready, easy today? That's our flex park model there, right, Ray?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of unique things. If you are ahead of time, say this is a new design, and you want to have that garage flexible to become an office space, normally that'll happen from the top down. You'll take the top so many levels, and you'll design those to turn into office or apartments, whatnot. But there's a lot of extra costs, probably about a 20% premium to have that flexibility to do that conversion in the future, because you could design the garage to come back in and level it out, because garages are sloping to drain, but if it's going to be an office space, it wants to be level. And then you got to have extra mechanical shafts and other things to bring utilities up to that upper level where you might want to have an apartment or condominium. If you're refurbishing an old existing building or an existing garage to be a different thing, same thing applies. You'll have to go in there and beef up the floor design, because garage floors are designed for like 40 PSF loading, where if it's an apartment or an office, you'll be in the 60 plus range, depending on what the code will tell you. So there are a lot of factors that come into play.
Oh yeah, toilets and sinks and bathtubs, having the logistics of dealing with those, and typically garages are designed. Well, a typical residential building might be designed with a 13-foot floor to floor or something. An office building might have a 15-foot floor to floor. Garages, we're looking at, 11-foot floor to floor, 10.5-foot floor to floor. So there's just an inherent clearance issue that you have to overcome too. So even if especially if you're repurposing an existing garage, it's not going to be a particularly nice space just because of the headroom and for a new garage, you build that extra space in. Well, there's a premium for building that extra space in that and there's a premium for building the floors more flat, and you have to put express ramps in and so on and so forth. So we've looked at and I mentioned our flex park model. We have a planning model where we go through the exercises associated with it, and I could probably count on one hand the number of times it's penciled out economically, and well, honestly, I don't know that it's ever penciled out economically, but there have been other reasons perhaps to go that direction. But
yeah, you just got to be prepared to pay that 15 to 20% premium. But if you want that flexibility in the future, we certainly can do it. It's just you got to be ready to have that extra cost factored in.
And then there's the whole question about if you're going to get 20, 25 years, 30 years out of the parking garage, does it make sense then to try to retrofit something or just tear it down and start build a really nice whatever it is that you want to build on that site in the future. All right, we got about 4 minutes left here, 3 minutes maybe, till we hit our hour. And I just wanted to quickly run through last 4 slides I've got on just parking operations and what it costs to run and operate a garage. And for those of you out there that have garages, you may, I'm sure you've got your own set of numbers, and there's different ways of looking at this, but this is just just for budgeting purposes. We've got it broken down into 3 major components. There's what we consider to be utility expenses. These include things like keeping the lights on. That's probably the biggest expense. The biggest expense. But then you got things like trash, and you got your elevator maintenance contracts, and if you're underground, you gotta have mechanical ventilation, and you got to pay for your software subscriptions for your parking technology, and a little bit of water for whatever purposes. And so there's the utility expenses. You have labor expenses. Now, parking operations have evolved a lot in the last 20 years, 25 years, and that and the attended parking, where you got a person sitting in a parking booth collecting money, has more or less gone by the wayside. For other than maybe airports, you don't see that much anymore. But you still need people to man your system, whether that's outsourced or whether that's in-house. You got to have somebody that's monitoring, somebody that's doing enforcement, somebody that's maintaining, going through and touch-up painting and replacing damaged lights, or just the day-to-day maintenance. You got to have janitorial service of some sort, picking up the trash and sweeping the floors periodically. And then somebody that's managing the income, because these properties are generating income, and somebody's got to be doing the accounting and making sure the money's going where it's supposed to be, and being able to track that money. So and then also some garages have valet operations depending on where they are and what they're doing. So that's the personnel aspect of it. And then there's a whole variety of other little things. There's taxes, there's business licenses, insurance. It's a pretty insurance heavy concept to operate a garage. I mean, there's always somebody that's claiming some damage for something. You got to have your fire systems, and all the stuff. a lot of this stuff will be outsourced rather than having it direct in-house personnel. But all these pieces make up the total operating cost for a garage. And if you're upper Midwest, you got snow removal, landscape expenses, and so on and so forth. So what does this boil down to? Well, I used to say, 10 years ago, I used to say, yeah, it's about 350 a space. And then it was 400 a space, and it was 450 a space. And a couple of years ago, it was 500 a space. And what we're looking at now is about $600, $615 per space per year. And this is kind of a median cost. Now, we don't go through quite the scientific level of scientific exercise that we do for the construction cost, because this number tends to be kind of all over the place. But if you have to pick a number to budget for operating, this will get you somewhere in the right ballpark. Your utilities, the utility piece is by far the biggest expense. We're ballparking that at about $330 per space per year. The labor is about 120. We used to be significantly less than that, but it's getting harder and harder to hire the low skill workers, and they're demanding, higher hourly wages, and so that number's gone up. And then the additional piece has just increased more or less with inflation. So that's where we came up with the $615 per year. Your individual situation is going to be a little different than that, but for budgeting purposes, this gives you an idea. And with that, we're about 4 minutes over time, so I appreciate you hanging with me. And Ray and I will address any remaining questions if anybody's still hanging on. Seeing
I know we
none.
answered all the open questions, but I don't know if I don't see any new ones that have came in.
I haven't seen any either. Well, maybe we wowed everybody and completely answered everybody's questions.
Well, it was kind of good that we answered them as they came up, because that kept them, relative to the subject matter at the time. So
Yeah. All right. Well, Dan, you want to close us out?
Absolutely. Like we mentioned before, guys, stay tuned for a recap of our webinar with some more information and a recording. And if you have any more questions, it looks like Rob's got his email and Ray's got his email right there. Feel free to reach out to them. Yeah, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Ray.
Appreciate
thanks,
it.
everyone. Appreciate it.